Hi guys, my name is Gene and welcome to the Curious Crafter channel. In this video, I'm going to show you how to make a DIY Resin Ocean Cube. This is the first in a series of resin projects that I will be doing, and I hope you like it. Let's get into it. To support this channel, please check out the description. You will also find links to the tools and materials used in this video. The first step is to prepare the base. The base is a piece of wood that is 16mm thick and almost a square of 65 by 70 millimeters. I use the rough side of the wood, which helps for the clay to adhere to the surface. I start by wetting this surface and then taking a piece of air drying clay, molding it into a ball, and then pressing it into the wood. The reason why I make sure that the wood is properly wet is just to help the clay to stick to the surface. So I take this ball of air drying clay and I just start to press it into the wood to make sure that it goes into all the nooks and crannies and just to help it stick to the piece of wood as much as possible. I flatten the surface out and then I cut off any excess pieces that I wouldn't need. So the next step is to just add a little of water on top of the clay to make sure it doesn't dry out while I'm still forming it. I would then start to pile up little ripples on the clay, which you would find at the bottom of a shallow ocean. I just do this by pressing parts of the clay together and then using my fingers to form a little ridge. I then just try to form it irregular just to make sure that they're not perfectly straight and has a sharp point to it. You can add more water to the surface to make sure it doesn't dry out while you're still working on it. And at the end, any excess clay can be cut off with a knife. Once you're done, the piece should look more or less like this. You can then put this in the sun or somewhere to dry. It would take about 24 hours and you have to just make sure that it's completely dry. It's always nice to have a wet cloth available nearby that you can use to clean your hands, the surface you're working on, and also the tools that you're working with, because this air drying clay will stick to anything that touched it. So I just use it all the time to keep everything clean. The next step is to create a layer of sand on top of this clay. So I used PVA wood glue and coated it onto the surface of clay using a paintbrush. It's really important at this point to make sure you're covering every part of the clay. Any spot that's not painted with glue will have an empty spot and you'll see it clearly as a white spot. So cover this whole area. And you would do this about 2 times. I also put some glue around the edges. The sand that I used was just something that I could find around the house. It's a fine, looks like a beach sand. I put it into a cup and then covered it with old stockings and also secured that with an elastic band. So this stocking would help prevent any larger material or any non-uniform particles to remain in the cup. I would then just spread it over this piece, over the glue, make sure that it's completely covered and leave it for a while just like that so that the glue adheres to as much of the sand as possible. And then once it's completely dry in about 24 hours, I would repeat the same process again to put on another layer. Now it's really important that you initially cover the sand with a piece of resin, otherwise you'd end up with lots of bubbles like you see in this craft. This is one of the failures that I had earlier on when I didn't cover the sand with a layer of resin that hardened, so all the bubbles would come out of the sand and you'll get this complete mess. I used epoxy cast 690, which is a clear epoxy that you mix on a 1:3 ratio, and you have to be just careful not to get any bubbles into the resin, and you'll see me very carefully trying to mix this. I actually was really careful when I mixed everything and so on. On this initial part where you want to cover just the sand, it's not so important to prevent bubbles, but it also helps just to have as little bubbles as possible. I put the resin into some warm water just to reduce the viscosity, and that will help with the mixing. I used the alcohol ink, which is the color indigo, and I added that to the mix. It starts off at a sort of a purple-ish color, and then once it's mixed through, when the resin heats up, it becomes a more ocean blue kind of color that I wanted. So I would then just add the resin and the hardener and also the ink, put it in the warm water again, and just stir it slowly until it's thoroughly mixed through. You'll see that the resin becomes first like a milky color, and there's lots of these streaks that's in the resin, and once it's thoroughly mixed you won't see any milky, let's say, color to it, and also none of these streaks that's in the resin. And also the color of the ink should be diluted completely. It should be mixed in completely. You shouldn't have any particles left. So I did it in a two-step process. I would mix it, and then I pour it into the cup that I used to measure the hardener in, and then mix it again to make sure I have got all the resin and all the hardener mixed in. I used some gloves when I added this. I didn't find this resin to be too bad on the skin, but always when you work with resin, it's important to be safe, so use some plastic gloves for that. I put the final piece with the sand onto a piece of plastic, and then I put a little bit of resin onto the surface. I just wanted to make sure that everything is covered. Any piece of sand that's not covered in a little layer of resin will produce bubbles when I do the deep pour. So I wanted to make sure it's completely covered. It even flows over the sides, and I then just use a heat gun to pop any bubbles and so on. Any resin that's on the sides of the wood at this point, I can just sand off later, and you can see the final surface. It already looks really good at this point. I liked it quite a lot at this point, so you can use it in crafts where you just want to stop at this point. It looks like wet sand, but it's completely hard and durable actually. To finish it off, and before I poured the deeper water, I would just make sure that I sand all the sides so that the dam that I make glues completely to it. I created the dam out of recycled plastic from toy boxes. The reason that I use this is it's very smooth, which helps me to get a very nice surface finish. And that helps me to not have to do too much work by sanding and polishing the craft later on. So I would just make sure to clean the sand and also this dam material, the plastic, before I glued it on. I would then measure it out and fold it into a perfect fit for this little wood piece. If I do this correctly, it would give me nice edges on the corners. I want the whole surface on one side to have no lines where plastic meets or anything, so I made sure that the joints are all on the corners and that the corners are perfectly straight and smooth. I use some hot glue to stick the plastic to the piece of wood. And the most important thing here is to make sure that it's completely sealed so no resin can seep out from the inside. And also, I don't want any resin to get into the dam, which would then be part of the craft in the end. So I just did this all the way around until it was completely sealed off. Then I would go around all the edges again to make sure there's no holes, and then I would even put an extra bead of hot glue around the bottom just to make 100% sure no resin will leak out. If any resin leaks out through any cracks or anything, you would lose the craft because it's going to be uneven and so on. The most important part is actually around the corners where our resin can often actually seep through. To create the stiffness for sidewalls, I used silicone and some corrugated plastic. Now the reason I use silicone instead of hot glue is because sometimes when you do a deep pour, the resin can heat up quite a lot. The hot glue would then become loose and the whole stiffener would fall off. Silicone will not come off because of heat, so this worked well for me for the stiffness. I made sure that I don't want to get any silicone on the inside of this because any irregularities on the inside of this dam will show up on the craft in the end. I secured all the stiffeners overnight using elastic bands just to make sure it stays in place while the silicone dries. When you dry it out overnight, just make sure that it's upside down or inside a container so that no dust will collect on the inside of the dam, because it's clean at the moment and you don't want any dust to be part of your craft in the end. I mix up a batch of resin again. The resin I put into hot water for a while. I measured the hardener as well and then mixed this thoroughly. You'll see the two layers of resin and hardener, and you just mix this really slowly and make sure not to get any bubbles trapped in there. Because the resin is a little bit heated at the moment, it's just warm, it mixes better, and it also helps for bubbles to be released more easily. I will then pour it back into the hardener cup and then add the ink and stir this thoroughly until I get a good mixture. So the key thing that I was looking for here was to just make sure that it's crystal clear and there's none of these streaks that you would find in the resin. So the inside of the dam, I painted some Vaseline just to help release the dam when the resin has cured. I made sure to cover all of this. And then I added the resin very carefully using a stir stick or a popsicle stick. Just slowly add it up until it completely fills to the level where you want it. At this point, I put it into a container just to make sure no dust will collect on the top surface or any bugs or anything will fall in there while it's curing. And then the next day, it's completely hard. The next step would then be to remove the dam, which can be tricky if you didn't add any Vaseline to release it. It can be quite hard, but it helps to have a heat gun available just to peel off any plastic. So I used a piece of pliers and just started peeling it piece by piece, looking for the joints and then going from there, pulling it off. If you do it correctly, you can get quite a nice finish. You'll see that there's very little work that I have to do to polish this to make it see-through. There's just a little edge around the top that you need to cut off all around the rim where the resin was gluing to the sidewalls. You also need to prepare the base a little bit for a final coat. But there's very little bubbles at this point. The good thing here was that I really spent a lot of time to try and reduce bubbles by trying different things. The things that I found works the best is to heat the resin a little bit with some hot water, and also to really carefully stir the resin while you are mixing it. Also, when you pour resin in for the first time, make sure that no bubbles are trapped in the corners of the cups, because they'll get mixed in and you'll have bubbles all over your craft. So I just removed all the hot glue from the base so that I can cover this with a layer of sand as well to make it look like a block of sand. I've tried to make a line across. The resin is really difficult to cut, so I just did this with the hot glue. I used wood glue again, covered the base around the edge, all the way around, and then covered this with sand, just like I did with the clay on the top. Now the important thing here is you don't want to make this glue too thick. If you make it too thick and you pour some sand on the top, it might start to sag while you're leaving it to dry. So it's better to do 2 or 3 layers of this, thinner layers, by adding some glue, pouring some sand, doing it again and again and again, repeating until you get the surface finish. So if you have a little bit of a ridge between the resin and the wood, you don't have to worry too much. By repeatedly adding some glue and some sand, it will eventually disappear. On the resin, I tried to match the little ripples that I made on the inside, and this then helped to make it look uniform, like it was actually a piece of sand that was cut out. I didn't bother by covering the bottom in the end, I just left it as is. So guys, here you can see what the final product looks like. I'm really happy with the results that I got. The water looks quite realistic. I like the way that the sand appears as well as the ripples that you get at the bottom. The finish around the wood came out well with the sand, so it looks like a sand cube, and overall I am satisfied with this project. This project was a stepping stone for me. I actually want to create a much larger and complicated resin craft, but I wanted to figure out exactly how to do it properly before I casted the resin into this larger project that I'm working on. So I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, please remember to like, share and subscribe, and watch as much of this video as possible. Also, if you want to support this channel, please check out the description where I provide some links to things that you can support this channel with. For example, you can use the affiliate links to buy any products actually that you want, and then it will give this channel some income as well. So I hope you have a great day, and thanks for watching.